Welcome to LOA Today. Walt and life coach Joel Elston here. Today is Thursday, February 22nd, 2018. 8 a.m. Eastern Time, your first daily dose of happy for the day. And I have to say I'm feeling particularly happy this morning, Joel, because last night we had a couple friends over. These are new friends that we met just after Christmas that are into the law of attraction. And it's been great. I mean, we're spending more and more time with them. This is like our third visit together, something like that. And it was just a wonderful evening. It's such a nice thing to have positive friends in our lives.
That's an amazing, when you attract that amazing feeling of having that thoughts, and it's because it's rare. At least in the beginning of my process, it was rare to run across other people with the law of attraction, and now it's pretty commonplace. But it's good to have those conversations that, at least to me, they have a lot more meaning as you instead of just generally talking about politics or the normal, sort of dinner party kind of, really talk about the law of attraction. I love to hear other people's views and how it's worked for them. So that is an exciting time when you can get to that place.
Oh, it's fantastic. And Anne-Marie and Mike, well, first of all, Anne-Marie and Mike are both contributors to the book that we're doing. So they've contributed manifestation stories. But they're also just fun people. It's just lighthearted conversation. There was some, talk about difficult stuff, but for the most part, it was just good, positive energy. And that's the part that's rare for me. Maybe it happens with you all the time because of you have thousands and thousands of friends, so maybe you have somebody that you don't even notice it anymore. But for Louise and I, this is a big deal.
Well, it is. I mean, when you, as I said, you as time goes on, I realize people that, his friends that have been historical friends over the years and really good people. But as I've changed and grown in the law of attraction, they're not always comfortable with that concept. But I've attracted so many people that are. And it just is, it's amazing to have those conversations. And I just make it a part of my daily life. And not everybody is on board with that. And that's fine. It's just, my surrounding people, I try to surround myself with positive law of attraction people in my personal life. That tends to invite more of the same. So, it really is, if I'm out to dinner or I'm out with friends, you can rest assured, that's that crowd that I'm hanging with, because that's who I choose to be with.
Well, that's good. That's great. I mean, it's lovely to have that. It's fantastic. One of the things that came up during conversation last night, Anne-Marie runs a local cultural arts / theater in downtown Middletown, Connecticut, which is about 20, 30 miles from here, something like that. And that location is right near a soup kitchen, and I guess there's subsidized housing upstairs from it and so forth. And so it gets a little bit challenging at times because she ends up basically with homeless people hanging out front. And you want to help, but on the other hand, there's limits to what you can do. I mean, she has enough time just keeping the art center funded, let alone helping other people. But it came up as a conversation point, and one thing that we were noticing is that in our conversation, it's like everything else that you and I have talked about over the years. You really can't help somebody unless they're ready to be helped. There has to be some level of acceptance and willingness to change and willingness to make a change in their own thought processes and so forth. It reminds me of the old Christian teaching about Jesus. Well, not so much Jesus. It's more like a generic thing, teaching a man to fish rather than just feeding him food. And if you teach him how to fish, you feed him for a lifetime. But the simple fact is, if he isn't willing to do the fishing, it's not going to help.
Well, and as we've talked about, we've touched on this subject in roundabout ways, and I have a unique perspective of homelessness because I've enjoyed. I've had some evenings where I had to sleep outdoors in my life, and at the time, it is such a negative black hole that you're in that you cannot see anything else, but that's where you're at. I mean, and so the concept of what you're talking about, I will, there are times I'll see people and I'll give them money and they're in that position that you're helping on some level, you're helping perpetuate the homelessness, of it. Now, I've seen people that are clearly hungry and in bad shape, and I say, yeah, it doesn't really matter. Here's some food. Maybe you'll get nourished brain enough to decide to make some changes. But homeless or poverty, and this goes against today's gentle way of looking at things, but it's a state of mind. And now it's very real, and it's very nasty, and it's very it's all the stuff that you want, but it is the ultimate expression of the law of attraction on the opposite side of what you're trying to get to. Homelessness is a manifestation of negative thinking, and I've often said, you've heard this, and I just used this the other day with a client, that divide up all the United States equally. Everybody gets the same amount of money, so everybody gets $1 million. And at the end of 5 years, the wealthy people that are wealthy, when you took it away from them, will be wealthy again, and the poor people will be poor again, because it's a mindset. And so, when you like your friend that has this art center and the homeless people, are you torn between, okay, here's the immediate help, but just reinforce the concept that I just need to hang out here. It's not to compare human beings with animals, but the national parks have signs up that say, please don't feed the animals, because they become dependent on that food, and they don't know how to feed themselves. Yeah. And and again, I'm not comparing, and I do have sort of a unique authority because I've been homeless. So it's not it's not necessarily a judgmental thing. It's just being there. But I will tell you, Walt, in my homeless state, my mindset was at probably the most ultimate negative, if you had a meter to measure the negative, and it was more homelessness. Mm-hmm. It really was.
And when you're manifesting homelessness like that, it is such a vicious cycle. I mean, it's a long distance, so to speak, from that state to something that even remotely approaches positive. How do you make that change when you're in that place? Because you're constantly being, you're dealing without basics in many cases. In many cases, I mean, clearly you don't have a place to live. Sometimes you don't even have food. How on earth do you focus on anything that's going to move you in a positive direction?
Well, and that's where it becomes so helpless in a lot of ways, because while I really believe in that mindset, if you can flip the mindset, you're instantly changed from that. However, in defense of sort of the negative, and I don't try to defend the negative, but it is, as you're saying, there's all the reinforcers are around you. It is a hopeless state. There is a state of no hope where there's no way out, and I don't even have food to eat. And when I was facing, the sort of the most devastating portion of my life due to my addiction, and the consequences of my addiction, I had nowhere to go. I had over $250,000 in credit card debt. I had felony charges that were pending. I had no food to eat, nothing. I had a change of clothes, and that was my worldly possessions. And that is not a place of positive, obviously. And so if somebody would have walked up to me and say, hey, all you got to do is change your mindset, I would have probably looked for a stick to beat them with, because it doesn't match where you're at. Now, it's the truth, but it doesn't match. So it is a long journey to work your way from that, not because the law of attraction takes that long to do it. It's because you have to start accepting new beliefs, and your beliefs at that level of homelessness, it's almost like being in prison for a long time. Once you get to that belief system, your reality is that. So getting away from that is a very hard thing to do.
So how do you do it? I mean, you did it. You managed to not only do it, but you managed to thrive in a way that few perhaps could have predicted at the time. How do you do it?
Well, and it was really by and seemingly impossible events. I ended up in a halfway house. I was living with other addicts and stuff. And again, that was just really by grace that somebody allowed me in, because I had no money. And then, one thing that I do realize that I unintentionally did, that after being homeless for, I mean, I don't want to make it sound like I was homeless for a year, but it was a week or so. And when my, the gentleman named, Rick Benson is the one that ran the halfway house / recovery center that I went to. It was for gambling addicts specifically. And it was in Florida, and it was on a little island, and but he had a house, and it was an older home, and it was in disrepair. It wasn't the cleanest place on the planet. But when I walked in, he showed me where I'd be sleeping. It was there's 3 beds in this little room, and the bathroom, literally, when you turn on the light, roaches scattered everywhere. But there was a hot shower, and he was going to make sure I had food to eat. So I had such a level of gratitude for that, what was available, because after sleeping outdoors, what I just described is still much better than sleeping outdoors. So I was like, hey, I've been, when he explained to me, well, here it is. It's not the nicest building in the world. Do you want to stay? And I go, did you hear that I was homeless? I mean, did you hear that? So of course I want to stay. And it changed. I was able to look at that I could see that. Well, this is better than where I was at. So I didn't know I was practicing the law of attraction at that point, but I did appreciate the new surroundings, and I appreciated them at a level far greater than I could have if I weren't homeless. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I think it's something that, well, it reflects, among other things, how there was at least some semblance of a leaning toward a positive mindset. Even though you were in such bad circumstances, right. You were willing to at least look that way. And that made a difference. Yes. And so you were able to say, yeah, this flea bag is actually better than having no bag. You were able to see that there was an improvement.
Yes. And I could, I can see the, reverse side on my way to homelessness. I could see, getting there in that almost the same reverse mindset. I remember when I lost my apartment, I had to stay at a hotel. I remember saying, God, I don't even have a place to live. I'm staying at a hotel. And then when I couldn't, even pay for a hotel, I slept in my car. And I remember going, it can't get any worse than staying in my car until I lost my car. And then I had nowhere to go. So I had that negative, it can't get worse. This is the worst thing in the world to what I perceive as a bottom or being homeless to that next step up. So I went down and I went back up. So I think as time went on, and plus my discovery of the law of attraction along the way, and things started to improve, and I just started naturally seeing that things were getting better, and I could acknowledge it. Now, I did have a tendency for a long time to say, yeah, but here's what's going to happen next. But I eventually got past all that. So it was a mindset unto itself, and it really is. I have I live in the Richmond area now, and I go by this corner on my way to my office every day, and there's this lady that is there, and she has a sign up every day. And she says, and I forget it exact, but basically, homeless, please help, God bless, or something like that. So I pretty much avoid her, and I'm looking at her, and I don't mean to be disrespectful, but she's clearly, she may be malnourished, but she's certainly not hungry. And I one day decided, look, I'm tired of seeing her suffer like this, and let me at least offer an alternative. I have a friend that runs a program, and this was her mindset. I got out and said, look, I said, I've talked to a friend of mine. I said, she has a bed available for you. I said, the only rules is you don't drink and you get to work and do job training. And she's looking at me like I was crazy. And I said, are you not interested? Do you want to get off the streets? And she said, I'm going to make $200 here today. Wow. And I'm like, okay. And she said, where could I make that anywhere else? And I said, well, that's a good point, but look what you're attracting. Look what you're involved. And it was like we were speaking foreign language. And I said, so what you're telling me, I just want to be clear, is you don't want to get off the streets. And she said, well, no, not really. I said, okay, that's all I needed to know. Thanks. I told her have a great day, and she was nice, and I left. And she really is in a mindset that this is better. Whatever's happened to her life, she's in a mindset that this is better than what she would deal with in a quote unquote traditional life. So she's actually accepted living it, and that's okay for her for now.
That's really something, because among other things, it actually mirrors a Sherlock Holmes story. I don't know if you realize that, but there is a Sherlock Holmes story about how Holmes discovers the murderer of a beggar, a known beggar on the streets. And it turns out that the murderer is himself, is the beggar himself. The beggar murdered himself in order to hide the fact that he'd been discovered by his wife in his beggar outfit. But it was an amazing story, because in the story, through his begging, he was accumulating the income of a nobleman. He was bringing in much more money than you could possibly earn through any trade at the time. And here you are telling the exact same story. I'm thinking, wow, it's not just fiction.
Wow. And so, so when you look at it,
by the way, if you're curious, the tale is called the Man with the Twisted Lip. Anyone who wants to look that one up, it's the Man with the Twisted Lip. That's the Holmes tale I'm talking about.
Oh, okay, good. Well, and Walt, when you talk about it, I mean, my goal always is when I see something like that, I need to sort of, in my mind, get my arms around it. Now, I've seen that woman, 50 times since then, and it doesn't bother me anymore. That's what she's choosing. That's just what it is. And so now that I'm aware of that, she doesn't want any more. And the number one mission in my life, and not only is to take the law of attraction to people that want it, but also realize it's free will. The human free, it's also not my job to shove it down her throat, So it is not my job to tell her what she wants. So this is her world, and this is what she chose to do. So a lot of homeless people fall in that category of they don't want to go into a program. They don't want to conform. They want to live off the grid. And I've seen multiple attempts to sort of force people back on the grid, and they return to off the grid. And so I have had an acceptance instead of trying to assign my version of what I believe people should be doing, just accept this is what they want to be doing. So, and often.
So I mean, let's get a kind of a perspective on the numbers here, so to speak. I mean, we all have this sense of there are a significant population of people who are perpetually homeless. They're not homeless for a week like you were. They're homeless and homeless and homeless and homeless. Do you have any sense of, is the woman you talked about the exception to the rule? Is she the rule? Is it like somewhere in the middle?
I can only go by, I don't know, but I will say that the ones that I've tried to help, her situation is more the rule. Now, I'm not trying to say that because that's such a small percentage. There are people that are severely mentally disabled out there. They don't, there are people that, want to get off and they have a lot of addiction. So I don't know exactly where, but I know that one of the things that I was criticized for when I was in South Carolina, there's a coalition to help the homeless. And what I was trying to do when I joined this coalition, I wanted to help. I had an idea of what they needed to do or what they needed to offer. And I approached the group. I said, they had a homeless kitchen and they fed the people 3 times a day. And when I went to their board meeting, I said, I think it's great that you're doing this, but I think you're also perpetuating their homelessness because you're making them not need to get off the street. And there's one lady in particular that was horribly offended by that. And she was just, I am not perpetuating, I'm saving lives. I said, I know you are. I'm not critical of your thought, but have we thought about helping with job placement, helping get their dental work fixed? Let's get them a physical. Let's get them in, do something to help them get off the streets. And again, this is an opinion, but the lady that was helping was equally as opposed. She got something out of helping them at that level. And she said, well, that would just cost too much money and that would, they wouldn't want to do that. And I'm like, wow. I mean, we're automatically shutting down an answer, sort of like that statement you said in the Bible, the analogy of the parable in the Bible of instead of teaching a man, instead of fishing for him to give us a fish, teach him how to fish And then he can do that, but there's almost that other side at work here that there were people involved that felt very compelled to keep doing it because their self-worth was tied up in helping them. Mm-hmm. It's almost like I asked the lady, I said, do you want them to get better, or do you want to just help them where they stay? She left the meeting at that question. I didn't mean to be so offensive, but it was really a real question. So you see, the mindset. If I expect a homeless person to be just homeless and stay there, they're almost performing to that, like okay, well, I need to do this. Or it's almost like religious-based programs. They feed you, but you come in and then you have to go through the prayer ritual with them and hear about whatever their message is of the day. That's sort of the cost of your food, is to be, to be spoken to about religion. Mm-hmm. And so it's a lot of this is missed. And, the reality is, if you can take someone and get them to see, first of all, how their success got them there, and put them in an environment. I'm the first to say we need to put them in an environment where they are nourished, where they do have shelter, where they can shave, where they can have a phone number for people to call them for job interviews. I understand we need all that. But it's in a similar sense, and I don't want to stray too far from this topic, but it's sort of like the concept of using methadone or Suboxone to help heroin addicts recover. For a short time, it could be a great tool, but for a long period of time, it just becomes another addiction. And the same thing with the homeless, helping them short term is necessary to help get them where they need to be. But the idea that this is doing them any good overall, you're actually, if you do it long term, you perpetuate that.
And that's a tough line to walk. It's a tough balancing act, really, trying to figure out where have you gone too far. And Louise and I are dealing with that right now. We have a friend who's in really bad straits, and we have tried to help him a number of different ways, and we have succeeded in helping him a number of different ways. He's also a very proud person. It's hard for him to accept the help, so that's a complication. But there's also the complication of the negative thought process. It's a big one. I mean, we literally heard the story from him within the last few weeks that he lives with his elderly mother. They're in a flea bag motel. That's where they've been reduced to at this point. And it's with this person who owns the motel who's just really, she's in a horrible place herself, and she treats people badly. She treats him badly, even though she relies on him to do repairs for free to the motel and things like that. So it's like this really dysfunctional situation. But they're in that situation, and apparently somebody who was angry at him for some reason anonymously contacted the state and alleged that he was abusing his mother. So all of a sudden one day this state worker shows up at the door and says, we've received a report that you're abusing her. And he and his mother were both sitting in the room. They both look at each other like, what are they talking about? We don't understand what's going on.
Wow.
Well, this visit actually turned into a very positive thing because the state worker asked him, well, why aren't you on the state subsidy for people who are helping their elderly parents? And Lee said, what state subsidy for people who are helping elderly parents? I didn't know about this. Apparently, it's something that pays $3,000 a month for somebody who's taking care of their parent. Well, that $3,000 a month, that would completely change their entire situation. So Here we have this big win, right? You know what happens next? He has to follow up. They're from England originally. So he has to follow up in England about some assets that affect his mother's financial situation that affects, filing to get the subsidy. And we set him up. We have him set up with a cell phone. He calls up. We put him onto an international plan so he can call over to the UK. And we figure, okay, great, he's in good shape. We find out 3 weeks later that the person in the UK faxed the information over to the state worker. The state worker couldn't read it and rejected the claim, and then he just dropped it. And I'm thinking, my God, the solution came to him, and he dropped it.
Yeah. But that becomes that's the law of attraction. He's anticipating. It's tough to see it, watch it happen. I have a similar story with a client I was with, a very sharp young man. He left college or left the university that he was attending with one semester left to go. Had basically needed a class to finish. So it had been a couple of years before, and he comes to treatment. He works on his addiction. He's doing really well, but he has a very negative mindset. So part of what I try to do when someone is dealing with addiction is obviously not just arrest their addiction, but help them, if get their life together. And if you're he was working at a $10 an hour job, and he's just a credit away or two from getting a bachelor's in something in like a pretty decent field. So I said, we have to get that bachelor's. And he said, oh, no, I can't. I said, it's just one class. And so I got him excited to do that. And I was in South Carolina at the time, and he was returning home to Florida to do this. So he goes in and he, just in a very, very good way. He walks in and he says to the student advisor, I believe, said, yeah, I'd like to look at getting this. And so she said, great, sit down. We'll look at it. So we, the crazy part, Walt, is she said, well, here's what's happening. You actually failed a class, and something about financial aid, how that could go. And you can't re-enroll because you have a failing grade in that class. And he leaves. Oh, dear. And so he comes back, or I call him. I said, what happened? He said, I knew it was going to be messed up. And he explained that. That doesn't make any sense to me. That's how he explained it to me. It didn't make any sense. And I said, look, three-way call that lady, and let's figure out what's going on. That is not the answer. And so he does. He calls her, and she said, oh, I'm so glad you called. She said, and he introduced me on the phone. He said, yeah, we were talking about, said that he can't re-enroll. He just gets up and leaves. And he said, I didn't finish my sentence. I said, wait, you just walked out. He said, all you have to do is get the professor who was in the class to agree to give you an incomplete or withdrawal for medical reasons. I forget what the term was. And if you do that, we will be able to, you could take this class, and that's all you need to get your degree. And the professor is here, and the professor is a recovering alcoholic who would be more than happy to do that, I'm sure.
Oh,
Let me put you through to him.
Wow.
So
yeah, same kind of thing. And the same thing's happening with this friend. Oh, well, there's more to it. Oh, sorry.
What's that?
There's more. I didn't realize there was more to the story.
We speak to the professor, who says, oh my goodness, I'm so glad you're reaching out. And he shares some of his recovery. And then he says, of course I'll do that. And he said, really, just come in and take my class again. And now that I know you're going through this, I'm going to make sure we get you graduated. And it turned out within 3 months, he graduated with a degree and all that. But his negative mindset, Walt, had dismissed the possibility, and anything that seemed like a roadblock was just, it was like a brick wall. And in reality, it was a comma. It wasn't a period. It was a comma. It was just, all we have to do is this to fix it. But he couldn't hear any of that.
Right. And we pretty much ran into the same thing with our friend. Once we found out what happened, we got him reconnected to the plan that we had put him on before was a temporary plan for calling the UK. So we got him onto that plan again. And last we heard a few days ago, he had made the phone call, so we still have to find out what happened. But, I mean, it's just remarkable how when you're in that really, really negative place, even when good things are happening, all it takes is one little thing to block you, and you give up so easily. And it's because of that mindset.
Yes. And it is definitely the law of attraction. It is the law of attraction at its greatest, so to speak. It is when it's that powerful negative emotion of defeat that invites more defeat. And that is such and that's where homelessness, and it looks horrible. It is horrible. And so your world becomes horrible, and that's your reality, is horror. And it's hard to break, not for any other reason than you believe it's impossible to break.
So for somebody who has been homeless for quite some time, and let's assume for the sake of discussion they are in the category of somebody who actually wants to stop being homeless, who wants to actually get an improvement, and it isn't like your lady there who was happy that she was taking in $200 a day as a beggar. Let's say it's somebody who actually wants to improve, and maybe they're in the midst of an addiction, okay, because you had that, so that's really kind of right up your alley. So what's
right?
You know, if you're in that really bad place, you've been there for a long time, you know that for somebody like that, turning that mindset around isn't going to happen instantly. How do you begin? How do you take those first few incremental steps, and what are those incremental steps?
Well, and it would certainly be an individual, look at each individual situation, but in general sense, what you would do, I believe, is I do agree with the concept of saying, look, I have a place for you. I can get you a place that you can be sober, and begin this process, and try to get them to understand whether they believe it or not. And I've used this line before. Say, look, I'm not expecting you to believe this, but your mindset is keeping you here. And if you really could take the moment to understand this, you are predicting this continual destructive homeless pattern in your life. And that's what you're bringing. So if you could just accept you're in the habit of homelessness right now with your addiction, then we can work on that. But it will require that you can only feed it to them as little as you can. It's almost like, here's that next step. Here's that next step. You can walk them through the process, but you cannot force feed it to them at once. It just becomes the law of attraction, as we've talked about before. It only can respond to the level you believe it can respond. And if most of the time they'd be looking at me like, this guy is full of it. But it does help when I say I have been homeless, I have been in this position, I have turned it around. That does give at least an opening for them to believe that it is a possible thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because it gives you credibility.
Yes.
And that credibility makes it possible for them to listen better, I would think. I mean, well, let me ask you another question that kind of ties into this. Abraham Hicks and others will recommend that instead of deliberately interceding in some of these cases, or particularly if it's something where you're involved in the negative struggle in some way, and so there's, in a sense, you're part of the negative history. Their recommendation is change the way you think about the person. Think about that person in a positive light, and think about how great it's going to be when the good things happen, and just focus and focus and focus and focus and focus on the positives for that person. Do you think that actually makes a difference?
And seeing it from this perspective, I do, but I don't think it's the way that it's presented. I don't necessarily agree with the way it's presented. Even though I'm a huge Abraham Hicks fan, I think they're coming from a lack of understanding perspective with that. I do believe we need to change the way we look at them, because how we treat people. And here's an example of where I do that. I've as you know, I buy tons of, I probably have given away 2,000 copies of The Secret. Mm-hmm. I buy used copies of The Secret all the time. Yeah. And so what I will do in that case is say, look, people are looking for something. I might say, here's a book that I really think could change, the way you would look at yourself. I think this would really, and this is a homeless person standing on the street corner going, did this man just give me a book? So it inside of them is probably like, I want to throw this book and hit him upside the head with it. Or there could be that launching of, this guy's looking at me differently. And I've used the line, what you believe about yourself is not true. Here's a book, and see if you can figure out what I'm talking about.
Oh, really?
Because I see you differently than you see you. I've told them that. But as far as a direct effect on that person, it is a slow process, because, again, everything here is free will. And no matter what I'm thinking for someone else, I cannot overcome someone else's negativity. Now, they may pick up on the fact I see them differently, and that gives them a different view. I've done that with a lot of foster care kids, where when I convince them I'm seeing them differently than them seeing themselves, they change. But the kids don't have as far of a history as the adults have, and the adults are more resistant to that positive because they have such a historical negative view that it's harder to break through. But it is possible to let someone know that you see them differently, and they will respond differently. And I've done this with there was a gentleman one time that I was working with, and he was probably 19 or 20, and I was working at the psych ward, and he was a really sharp guy, and he was just, everybody kept saying, oh, he'll go off every night, he'll try to hurt everybody. He's really, and that's what they were anticipating, and sure enough, he did it. So I walked him the relatively new, and this is where I really understood the law of attraction. But I said, look, when I got there, I don't want all this silliness tonight. I think you're a pretty decent guy. Can at least for you tonight, can we play, can we just not do that thing tonight? And he looked at me and he goes, yeah, we don't have to do that. I go, great. And so we had an evening where he didn't do that. And that was the first evening in like 3 weeks that he didn't have that acting out behavior. And so the psychiatrist and the therapist that were in charge of the unit asked, what did you do? And I said, I just asked him if we could not do that tonight. And that sort of became their way of, and I said, we just sort of, and this is, I didn't have the knowledge that I have now, and I didn't know what I was saying, but I do understand I'm expecting you to behave differently, and I see you differently. And until I'm just can't be convinced, and otherwise I'm expecting you to be, I think you're a pretty normal dude. I just think you've had a lot of bad stuff happen, but I don't think we have to do this every evening.
And in that way, you were essentially helping him shift his mindset a bit.
Yes. And you can put those examples out there. Now, once I get their ear, I've seen people, I've seen people go from homeless to doing very well because they were open to the suggestion. They really understood it, but it can become such a, the older and the longer somebody is homeless and the more entrenched in their beliefs they come in, it's the equivalent of trying to discuss someone, with explain to people that the law of attraction is not a religious based concept. It's just a law of the universe. But people that are told that the law of attraction is part of this new thought thing and it's anti-God, it's anti-Christianity, and it's anti-that. So no matter how you present it to them, they're convinced you're a heathen trying to get them away from God. And so even though a lot of the concepts are exactly what's preached in most religions, they can't hear that. So they're convinced that you don't have their best interest. When you come with someone with a preconceived, just set in stone mindset, you can believe all you want for them to be differently, but until they have a catalyst to see it differently, then that it doesn't do a whole lot of good. But you do, when you treat them differently, at least when they're ready, they can say, I remember Joel never believed I was that way. And they can behave differently.
The thing that keeps striking my attention here as we're talking about this is that whenever we approach this whole topic about homelessness, about people in severe addiction, people who have basically cut themselves off from the basics of life unintentionally and now are struggling just to survive, we don't think about all of these extra support mechanisms and the role that they're playing. But what you're basically educating me about is these support mechanisms can be support or they can be detriment. And we have to take that into account when we're evaluating the overall picture. If we don't take that into account, we're actually missing part of the picture. Yes.
And that's where it's missed. It's a lot of times, and again, we try to stay away from any political type stuff on the show. At least I do, but I'm all in favor. We live in a country of great abundance. We have a ton of money. We should not have people going to bed hungry. We should not have people without health care. We should not have all that. However, there's an abundance that we all have an equal shot at. So I don't mind short-term help to allow people to get launched, so to speak. However, the concept of long-term welfare, a long-term disability, and when we say that, I mean There are people who are truly disabled. They truly need assistance. Your friend would greatly benefit by a program that he discussed. I'm not talking about people in dire situations, but at the same time, it can become such a debilitating factor that you're focused on that. We mentioned a few weeks ago, I was at the Social Security office getting my son's new Social Security card.
Right.
And so many people were focused on getting their disability that they have become their disability. And some were truly disabled. I mean, to the point where, of course, you need, and then others are disabled by the fact that they believe they're disabled. And that's where it gets controversial, because I don't want anyone to suffer, but I also don't want to be a part of their mindset of suffering, of having to, well, I don't want to give so much or put them in a position where they don't need, that I've often talked, I don't want to make it too comfortable for them where they don't need to get out of that. I just want to stay right here in my cocoon where I have just enough to survive and I don't have to do anything. I've literally heard people turn down jobs because it paid too much money and they would lose their disability.
Wow.
It's like,
that's quite a mindset.
So it really is. And so I feel sorry for that, because I have I guess a friend. She's a really good person. She's a nurse, and I offered her a job at a facility I worked at before, full time. And she said, no, I cannot make more than $20,000 in a year, I think she said, but I will work that much. And I said, I'm offering you an $80,000 a year job.
Oh my goodness.
And you're with benefits, and you're turning it down so you don't give up your disability. She said, if I lose my disability, I probably won't get it back. I go, why would you want it back? And it was a mindset that she was entrenched in. I said, we're giving you health. Well, I have these other conditions, and I had to fight so hard for my disability, and they'll say I'm not disabled if I can make that much money. I go, but you can't make that much money. You're not disabled. So it becomes a vicious cycle. And I'm not critical of anyone that's listening, but that is on disability, or am I trying to be in a position of judgment? But I do want everyone that when you strive to, you need a reason to get up in the morning. You need a reason to move forward. All the great progress I've made in my life it started out of necessity. Now it's gotten to just a passion, but I don't want to be comfortable. Comfort for me is not a good place. I like to move forward. I'm uncomfortable being too comfortable. I love movement. I love the catalyst.
Well, you're just strange.
I love feeling better.
You're just a strange person. That's all there is to it.
I'm very odd. I love, but I get up every day doing a job I love. I get up every day having a life I love. And I'm in charge of that. I'm in sole possession of charge of that thought process. And if I'm on disability, or I'm stuck, if I'm tied to some other form of I need this to get me through it becomes, I don't have the life I have without that. So we teach people to survive and not to thrive with that mindset. And to me, that's where we're missing the boat. It's about helping, but not enabling. It's about teaching them the right things. It's teaching them how to think to the point. Let's think your way out of this. Let's live a life that you, and I see people that have bought into it. There's tons of stories of people that and I wish I remember where I read this. It was a Facebook post, but this gentleman, he found a copy of Think and Grow Rich in the trash as he was going through a trash can in New York City, homeless. Put it in his pocket, sitting on a park bench, read it in a day, read it again the next day, read it again the following day. And within 3 years from that day was a millionaire.
Wow.
Using that concept.
Wow.
So to me, those are things that are learned. The law of attraction will attract people to it when they're given. You will never force it on them. It is more of I can give you the mindset, but you've got to do the research. That's why we do this show. That's why I've always told you, I'm always thirsting for more knowledge. I mentioned a book that I had never even heard of until I started working on my doctorate in metaphysics, and it came across and the idea that this book was written in 1903, it's just crazy that it was written there. It was written before, before really any of the other books on law of attraction I'm aware of, and it has all the information, and I never even heard about it. It was crazy.
Yeah, yeah. Well, that's the thing. I mean, you're describing, especially when you're talking about people who have the mindset, and it's that addictive mindset. I think we can honestly say, for instance, that the nurse who didn't want to give up her disability for an $80,000 a year job was addicted to her disability. And when people are addicted to stuff like that, when they're addicted to support, when they're addicted to help, that becomes a really difficult situation. I mean, yeah, you can take the kind of the hard edge, I'll call it the Republican view, like, well, you just got to cut them off. But the problem with that approach is you're trying to apply one rule to all cases, and it doesn't work. You end up killing yourself just by doing that. It all has to be case by case, and it all has to be handled based on what that person is really ready to receive, which ultimately means this is all an inside job. We think about this stuff as an outside job, but it's really an inside job.
Yes, and the part that I'm wanting, I always want to get across to people is this is very much not only is it an inside job, but it's an inside job that once you do it, it is the ultimate fix. It changes everything. It's an incredible way to do it. It's an incredible way to look at life. You do it differently. What you've been thinking hasn't worked for you. You have to literally change your understanding of what you believe, how the universe works. And this is important, very important. This piece of I have to, I believe, is not necessarily true, and that's a hard place to get to for a lot of people. But once you do it, once you start accepting that new rule, it can happen to anyone, but it has to come. I've never seen the law of attraction forced on anyone. I've seen it presented, and most people go through the same process as they sort of, wow, this makes sense, and then they have their objections to it, but then they actually see it working, then they get more and more attracted to it, and it starts to build in their life. But so I always try to plant the seeds, but I never try to oversell it, because if not, I just become the guy trying to force religion down somebody's throat, which is always a negative. I've always wondered the people that really think that they're doing good by trying to force their beliefs down other people. It just doesn't work.
Oh yeah, yeah. I was thinking about that last night actually, because one of the things that our friends said to me about the podcast, because they're loving the podcast, they're saying. And the reason they love it is because they do find it to be enjoyable and entertaining and, in my words, not preachy. And I was the one who described it as preachy during the conversation, preachy and teachy, which is exactly what we've been trying to avoid. And I think we've done so successly because they're telling us, yep, it's not preachy and teachy. And that's great. I love that. I love that. The thing that gets me about preachers, I have never expressed this before, but I want to take the opportunity to express it here. The thing that gets me about preachers is that it occurs to me that a preacher is someone who believes that if he doesn't make you hear what he has to say, you won't learn it.
Right.
And I think to myself, boy, is that arrogant. What an arrogant position that is.
Yeah, and one thing that you and I have always been clear on, and the other host as well, is we talk about our understanding and evolution within the law of attraction ourselves. I do not claim to have all the answers. I can share my experience and what I've witnessed and the literal miracles that take place with the concept. But to be honest with you, I don't think I'm halfway through understanding this all. I mean, and I'm further along than most probably, but I still have a lot to learn. So the concept that I tell you all the time of I'd like to learn more. I can share what I've been through, but I am not in a position to tell another human being how to believe or how to implement the law of attraction. I can share what we do, what we've witnessed, but you do what you do and see if it works. I've witnessed, as we've known each other over the past several years, I've watched you apply the law of attraction when you discovered things for yourself and you learned that and you applied it, you didn't hear anybody say, do this. You discovered it, you did it, and you implemented it, and you changed your way of thinking. And I've watched it do you do a wonderful job with that. But it was because of your self-discovery that you did that.
Yes, right. That could never have happened by somebody just telling me, well, you got to do step A, step B, step C. You got to do it my way because it's my way or the highway. That just would not have worked. There's no way that I could have bought into that.
Right. Right. And, as we always joke, you like to study it and research it. And,
I'm perpetual. I do it to my own detriment. I tell you, it's crazy.
Yeah. Yeah. But when you realize that exact statement, now it's good that you like that side of it, but at the same time, you also realize that you weren't as productive or things weren't happening as quickly. So that over analyzing wasn't serving you.
Right.
And it didn't mean you had to get rid of all your analyzing. It just means the over-analyzing piece. Exactly. And so you made that change, and it served you very well. I mean, you really have just made great progress. And so I use that as an example. I've witnessed miracles. I'll probably see at least what I call a miracle or two every week. Just amazing discoveries. People who really didn't believe things are now starting to see this happen in their life that homeless people that turn around. One young man was working at McDonald's, is going to be a medical doctor in 2 years just because he applied the law of attraction. There's multiple cases of amazing achievement of using this concept, but everybody had to get there themselves. I love helping people make their discoveries, but it is never me saying, do it this way. You got to work on how you're viewing your thoughts. It's your thoughts are dictating things. Your personality has a lot to do with that. There's a lady I met with yesterday in my office, very nice lady. She wants to be more law of attraction oriented, and she said, but I don't want to be stupid. And I didn't understand. She said that several times, and she said, well, I don't want to act like things are good when they're not. And she views that as being stupid or being a liar. Mm-hmm. And I said, no, it's not about being stupid or being a liar. It's about choosing a perspective. And, when you look at things, I view things from the way that I choose to view. I'm in charge of that. I'm not lying to myself. I can see it either way. It's just you get to choose which one. And she picked up on that a little bit, but she's got a lot of work to do in that area. But her challenge is she wants to be a realist and practice the law of attraction. I said, it's possible, but you have to understand, you have to open your definition of what being a realist is. A realist isn't always being negative. It's about just looking at the situation as it exists. My situation is amazing right now. It has been for a long time not because anything's really a whole lot different. It's just, I believed it was amazing. Now it really is amazing. And that isn't a fake world, but in the beginning, it was different. So everybody that's out there, and I don't want to end on a confusing note, we have, whether you're homeless or whether you're dealing with whatever is that your challenge is, having the belief that you can bring into your life what you really want. Homelessness creates such a deep hole that you can't get out. However, when you understand that deep hole is created by your thoughts, not the actual homelessness, then you can start to apply that and things will happen. People will come into your life. Situations will come into your life. Life will change. And that's the beauty of it. I mean, it is there for everybody to use. And once the equal part of it is homeless people that actually get this become incredibly successful. Now they're really buying into it. They become incredibly focused on their beliefs because they saw how it changed.
And that's a theme you've talked about a lot, particularly for yourself, but also with many of your clients and the foster kids you've worked with and so forth, that when you go through something really horrific like that and you are able to change your mindset and come out the other side, the change is usually very, very dramatic, more so than for somebody who doesn't have that really horrible situation to go through. And it's your way of saying there's a strength in that. You become a stronger person by doing that, and you become better at focusing. You get better at focusing on what it is that you want. So there's an actual benefit to going through all that kind of thing.
Yes. And one of the things that I always point out is I had a young lady in my office this week who's experienced a lot of trauma in her life over the years, and it's very real trauma. And I really was very impressed with her. She's got a great current attitude, but yet she gets stuck into this trauma, and she thinks very negatively about herself. So I reframed it for her. I said, well, here's what I see. I see an incredibly smart lady who has some of the strongest resilience I've ever seen displayed. You have survived all this stuff, yet you're here, you're thriving, you're growing, you're wanting to get better. Life has tried to kick your ass and you haven't allowed it. And I point that out to her, and I try to spin it in a way that she sees it, because that's true. I see her. I don't see all of this trauma. I see resilience. I see strength. So the more you go through, really the stronger your belief can be in the law of attraction, and the greater your manifestation toward the positive, because you've done it so intently on the other way. And it really is amazing to see that aha moment in their face when they start to buy into, I am resilient. I have survived. Homeless people are incredibly resilient. They were able to make do without anything. Look where you're at. You have a strength. You can survive anything. Apply that to life now. Let's put that same energy toward a positive direction. And that applies up and down the scale. No matter where you're at right now today, when you apply that same intensity of thought, of positive and law of attraction, if you can apply the equal amount from the other side, it becomes amazing, Walt. And I used to say in recovery that if you were willing to recover from addiction with the same intensity that you practice your addiction, you'll be incredibly successful. When you're willing to apply the positive side of the law of attraction with the same intensity that you apply the negative side, you will thrive to a level you never believed was possible.
I guess that's how it is as somebody ends up starting out as a person who's homeless, Think and Grow Rich, and 3 years later is a millionaire. That became their springboard.
Yes. They're driven at a level, and they believe it at a level that it's just not negotiable for them, because they've witnessed it happen. Had a little success with the law of attraction, they believe it a little bit, and so they apply it. It works a little bit. But when you get to that level that we're talking about, when it's undeniable, it's a factor in my life that, I apply it on every day. I have no doubt. There's no negotiation in some of this for me. And I feel it every day. It's just, there isn't a fear attached to anything anymore. There's no fear of money. There's no fear of health. There's no fear of, I'm living in this life that's amazing, and I insist on staying there. And that's all that I can give myself with that amazing life.
That's phenomenal. That's fantastic. That's unbelievable. And it's terrific. And I want to thank you for taking the time to share this perspective, because it's a very timely topic. It's a topic that affects everybody. Everybody sees it. They're affected by it. I know I see it. I'm affected by it. To hear the different perspectives that you bring to it, because you've been there and because you've worked with people on that really helps a lot. So thanks for taking the time to do it. I know you do it anyway, but thanks.
I'm glad I can do it.
Yeah,
yes, I appreciate that. Thanks.
And I appreciate that you do it. In fact, I can't wait to talk to you next week. It's going to be good, I'm sure, no matter what we talk about.
Yeah, and it is every week. I enjoy this so much. Thanks for having me on, and I hope our audience has a great rest of the day, and I can't wait to see what happens this upcoming week.
And by the way, I haven't asked you in a while, but if somebody does want to reach out to you for your particular assistance, how do they reach you?
JoelElston.com is my website. Just JoelElston.com is my website. It's the best way to get me. My phone number's on there. I also have a book called The Bench you can get on Amazon by Joel Elston. So either of those, it eventually can get to me. I'd love to talk with you if you'd like to talk.
Sounds great. Thanks a lot, Joel. We'll talk to you again next week.
Thank you, buddy.
All right. And we'll hope that you all come back to join us next time as well here on LOA Today. Goodbye, everybody.